Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations.
Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague and good friend, Nikki Shingle. Nikki, welcome.
Thank you, Kent. It's good to be here.
Nikki, we've had the unique opportunity of having some connections in the past, which contributes to this story. First one I'm thinking about is we would have grown up in similar areas of the state, central to western Pennsylvania, and we would have gone to somewhat rival high schools in the past.
That's right, yes.
So go Warriors and
go Dragons.
Absolutely. The other interesting part of our connection is we would have had the opportunity to work for the better part of about a dozen years at the same organization, Everence, a national faith-based financial services company. And so we know a little bit about each other.
Yes. It's great to have continuity with meaningful work and good friends from one place to the next in the journey.
Here we find ourselves back together again at North Group, which I'm delighted. And even though, Nikki, we did work together as colleagues at Everence, I'm mindful it was a bigger company and we worked in separate areas. So I know a little bit about your story, but one of the things I'm really looking forward to today is even going deeper and hearing more about that.
Well, as you said, I grew up in a country area, not too far from where you would have grown up, and had the privilege of having lots of warmth and love in my family. My mom and dad just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary this year, and they were high school sweethearts. And I have an older brother who's 3 years ahead of me. And while Sean and I both love to spend time with people, he got all the artistic and creative genes.
Okay.
So it was a great upbringing. My parents sacrificed a lot for Sean and I to have opportunities to do the things we were really passionate about. And I think probably the greatest gift that my parents gave me it was twofold, actually. My dad gave me one of the great gifts and my mom gave me the other. And I would say my dad gave me the gift of having an irrational belief in me. It didn't matter what I was thinking about doing. He thought I could do it well. And that belief in me created this confidence that probably was misplaced at times, but allowed me to lean into some things that I maybe wouldn't have otherwise without his confidence in me. And then as I journeyed into those things that were often stretches, the gift that my mom gave me was the gift of her encouragement and her presence. And as things were unraveling or feeling like I was in too deep or too stressed, she was always there to just absorb whatever it was I was sending out and make it feel like, it's okay, I'm here with you, whatever it is. So it was a great upbringing. I loved my childhood.
It sounds like a pretty functional situation. No family's perfect, but
right.
for sure, it was a good container to get started. You know, you think about the profound impact that anytime we have somebody who believes in us and speaks that into our life, even more than maybe what we believe in ourselves, it's very powerful. We never can underestimate that kind of impact. And it sounds like your dad was that person for you. Yeah,
I think about sports teams he encouraged me to try out for. Any sports camp I ever went to, he would be, camper of the week, Nick, is it going to happen? Of course it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so he just always made me believe I could make the all-star team or land the job. As a first-generation college person in our family, I just thought it was out of consideration that I would go away to a private liberal arts college. And
remind us where you went to.
I went to Messiah University. It was Messiah College then.
At the time.
Yes.
A little bit of dating of ourselves. Yes.
That's right. I'm sure he wondered in the back of his mind, how will we make this work financially and how will this happen? But if it's a dream she has, I'm going to tell her she can do it.
Yeah.
And I always felt that from him. I always felt like my dad believed in me.
Yeah, and we need people in our lives, even beyond our parents, but it starts there to believe in us even more than we believe in ourselves. You had a close relationship with both your father and your mother, but describe even the relationship with your mother, how it was similar or different than the one that you had with your dad.
Yeah. So as I said, my mom I tell her she's the carrier of all my heavy things. as mom, you maybe don't know this, but maybe you saw your wife do this. We carry lots of bags as moms. It's
yes.
10 bags all the time.
Yeah.
And my mom not only carried all the things, but she carried the emotional weight of everything I was navigating. She was my best friend. She was the matron of honor in my wedding. She's still the first person I call when something hard or something amazing happens.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what time of the day it is. She drops whatever she's doing, and she's ready to listen.
So your family of origin you're describing, your one brother and your mom and dad, talk about your current family now.
Yes. So Andy and I, my husband and I will, actually tomorrow's our 21st anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So again, not always easy,
Yeah.
but just a really rich relationship. We have a 16-year-old daughter, Ava, and a 12-year-old son, Zach. And they're the center of everything right now. They keep us busy. They love to be active and outdoors, and we're trying to show up for all of it.
Absolutely.
It's a good season.
Are you, how far along is your parenting book that you're writing, or is that going to be delayed a little bit?
That's hilarious that you say that, because I'm not an expert in parenting.
Wow.
But there are lots of things that I experienced as a child that give me some insights. If I ever wrote a book, I'd call it Camper of the Week.
Camper of the Week.
Yeah.
So you already have a title.
I do, a working title.
Any cover design ideas, any images for the cover? I've always joked that if I were to write a parenting book, which I don't aspire to do, I would somehow wait till if I outlived my kids, because you just never know. You just never know what they're going to do or be about. They make us proud. We've always loved them.
Yes.
And yet you're taking a risk if...
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I heard some good parenting advice from a friend one time who said, if you don't take credit for the good things your kids do, you don't have to feel responsible for the mistakes that they make.
Sounds like good perspective.
I don't know.
I'm going to tuck that one away as well.
Tuck it away.
So, share about then, just kind of on the career track, some of the jobs that you've had, some of the more interesting ones, and then just kind of walk us through how you eventually, we talked about Everence already, but then even arrived here at North Group.
Yeah, great. So my very first job where I received an official paycheck and began paying taxes was actually picking strawberries at an orchard in our town. And I loved that job, Kent, because it was all about the hustle.
Yes.
You got a tray at the beginning of the morning. It's blazing heat in the middle of June. And there were the little containers.
The little green quart baskets.
Yeah, that's right. And you would fill them up with strawberries.
Right.
And the owner of the orchard would basically dump out the last two to fill up the first, because you got paid by how many you filled.
Yeah.
She would dump them out because there was a temptation to bring them with less. And there was also a temptation to only pick the big ones because they filled the container. And she would send you back to the row to get the little ones too. So
there's a lesson in there somewhere. Yeah.
A lesson for sure. But I was committed to never having my last two dumped out.
Right.
And to never repeating a row and to getting paid the most.
Yeah.
So I hustled.
We never talked about this, but I also picked strawberries for an aunt and uncle who had a strawberry patch. And when we sold them roadside, I don't know how you sold yours. Did you do the chocolate covered ones?
No.
Get them? Okay, so
we weren't
sold
that sophisticated.
and then we sold the chocolate covered ones just to entice. It was a bit of a marketing.
Okay. That's good work.
So that was one of your earliest jobs.
Yes. But after graduating college, most of my work was in charitable giving.
Yes.
I became a professional fundraiser after graduating and worked for a variety of places, including Messiah, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, WITF. It was a great profession.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and I want to pick up on that because as we would have worked together too, you were always working in and around development, generosity, charitable giving. And I just remember some of the things that you would say, and I just invite you to elaborate on them. You would just say things like, generous people are the happiest people, and they're just the most fun to be around. And there's just something about a generous person, principle-wise, that was contagious. Say more about what fueled you. Yeah.
Generous people are the happiest people that you could know. And part of it truly is, my observation is that when people can get outside of themselves and think about others and have an impact in improving someone else's life, they can manage their own hiccups in a more gracious way. And there's also something about financial resourcing that is just, there's a temptation to to hang on to it.
Yeah.
It brings us a lot of security. It brings us
identity.
And it might identity,
Right.
maybe even some artificial hope sometimes. But financial strongholds can be real. And a generous person who can say, you know what, I have enough, or I know where my identity comes from, or I know who provides for me, therefore I can share with others. That's the person I want to be friends with.
Absolutely. And it reminds us why, Jesus wrote a lot about a lot of things, but
Yes.
he wrote most of all about money and what that could do to our human hearts, or the love of money. I should clarify. Money in itself isn't bad, nor is wealth. But you had a chance to walk along some pretty creative, successful people who were on that journey.
Yes. And one of the biggest joys for me in walking alongside folks in their generosity journey truly was thinking with them about how many of them would start the conversation with me, particularly when I worked for the foundation and we were helping people think about planning their generosity. So it wasn't when you're fundraising, you're saying, I know you have a passion about this thing that our organization is doing. Would you give money to it? But at the foundation, I got to be part of a broader conversation about how they wanted to impact the world and, what changes they wanted to see and what they wanted to be a part of. And one of the beautiful things about that work was often clients would come with this idea that I should give because I'm going to face some tax implications, or I should give because my family modeled that and now I have resources and I should give
almost
back.
Out of a sense of obligation or duty, expectation.
Yes. And what I counted a win was being able to walk alongside of someone who was transitioning their language from I should to I am. So I am a generous person. I am a person who cares about literacy. I am a person who cares about evangelism. I want to honor my parents because I appreciate them. That's a whole different conversation than I should. And then when you get to be part of that, you really get a front row seat to see the good that's happening in humanity. It's beautiful.
We do, and even at North Group, we call that rarefied air sometimes. We have a front row seat to some rarefied air, and you're describing an example of that. And it's shifting from I have to I get to. There's an opportunity there. Nikki, I'm thinking about, too, like generosity, we don't want to define it. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but financial resources, but there's lots of different ways we can be generous. And I wonder even that informs, but what have you observed or even experienced from, your family even in terms of generosity that shaped you?
Yes, absolutely. So time, I think scientifically time is an infinite thing, but for me personally, I can't find a way to get more than 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
And so someone who's willing to give me time, that's a generous gift. And so I think of my mom in that way. And, energy too. I believe that energy is something we can give generously. We can inspire people. We can bring hope.
Our talents.
Absolutely.
Relationships. So that actually leads me to the question of, we all have demands on our resources. And I'm thinking time in particular. You have a unique way that you've developed that helps you discern kind of a filter or a lens in terms of what you say yes and no to. That's, I think, served you to kind of set some boundaries, keep some things that are important.
Yes.
First and foremost. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I talked about the hustle a little bit with the strawberry picking. So I love to hustle. And
you're an athlete. It's part of, you were a basketball player, also a college basketball player.
Yes.
Hustle.
And so when you're working hard toward things and, especially earlier in my career, I really wanted to grow professionally. I wanted to have more leadership opportunities. And sometimes organizations see a hungry person, a go-getter, and they just, hey, do you want to do this? And do you want to do that? And
Patrick Lencioni talks about hungry, humble, smart, but that, hungry part, we want to see some drive. We want to see some fire in people, right? So it's
exactly.
important.
And so I found myself probably a decade ago being busy and hustling, but finding this disconnect between what I was working toward and what I felt like my actual purpose was. And so I thought, we need to unwind a little bit of this. And I didn't really know how to do that because I was interested in continuing to advance and I wanted to be on the scene and doing the things. And so I had to really step back and figure out, how will I know when I say yes?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a cost to saying yes. And I learned that, especially as my kids grew a little older, I found that, 3 Halloweens in a row, I was at conferences speaking.
Right,
And
right.
while I was there to help pick out the costume, I wasn't there for trick or treat. And when you commit to something that's 6 months ahead of time, sometimes you don't know what you're actually saying no to when you say yes.
Absolutely.
And so I worked really hard at creating a framework for how I would say yes.
Share more, because as leaders, anybody, we all could benefit from that. So what did you discover?
Yeah, so probably a driving principle, and I already kind of referred to it, is I had to figure out what it is that I really felt was my purpose. And I really want to serve communities and inspire people to be more than they thought they could be. I saw how my dad did that in my life, and I want to give that to other people, and I want to do it in relationship. And so that kind of became the first lens. Does this opportunity fit that? And then, of course, sometimes we get asked to do things that are part of our job responsibility that we would rather not do. Well, that became a next question. Is this part of my job responsibility, or is this an extra opportunity?
Well, and let me just interject. Many of us have jobs where it's like a job description doesn't fully capture or contain. So when do we know what's in bounds, what's out of bounds? We need a tool or a method like what you're describing sometimes to give us that balance.
So is this something I really am responsible for doing?
Right.
Or is this an extra thing that I could do, help the organization, maybe, help me gain a new skill or a new understanding of something in the learning of that activity or not? So that became another lens. Another thing that's really important to me, I talked about how energy is really important. Another lens was I would ask myself, is this work going to be done with people who bring energy to the work? Or is this going to be an opportunity that's going to be draining to me? Because I can do more when there's more energy, and that's not something I can create on my own all the time. So thinking about that was another way to discern.
Very powerful. So can you think of a specific example or a story where you've used these criteria or these lens to make a decision that ultimately you can look back and say that served me well, that served others well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, even not just inside of work, but in volunteer opportunities. And because I bring energy to situations, people think, oh, Nikki Shingle will be great at this. So sometimes people will ask me to lead things that involve children. Not my thing, Kent.
It's not.
If I have to take middle school girls camping, I might not make it out of the woods.
There might not be the same number come back.
Right.
That it started.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
That would be problematic.
Yeah.
Or like we're helping in the nursery. I sweat when I'm working in the nursery. So yeah, I think it's a discernment process.
For sure. And some of us also feel like this is this need to explain why. I just read a quote, it's a very short quote, that no is a perfectly good, complete sentence. No. But how many of us have trouble saying no?
Hard.
It's no,
Yes.
and then the feeling that we need to rationalize or explain.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
Yes. I think for people pleasers and perfectionists especially, it's like there has to be more than no.
Right.
And I think about, too, would I be gracious in receiving someone else's no? And
Exactly.
I think I would be. I want to be. So that should give me permission to allow my no to be no. But yeah, thinking about opportunity cost, I think there's several layers of this kind of getting to yes framework. But how else will this assignment be resourced? And I did create some pretty specific travel parameters because it was in a season of life where that was a big part of being home and being available for my kids. So did it fit into my travel restrictions? So lots of layers. But that was a really great guide for me in a season where I wanted to grow. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be a great team player, but I wanted to be present for the thing that I felt was my highest purpose in work.
Yeah, something we all desire to do and work at in different ways, unique and personal ways. Well, thanks for sharing that. Let's kind of reflect, too, maybe shift a little bit on some of the experiences that you've had that have had profound effect on you that maybe haven't been so positive or maybe weren't as you would have hoped or wished. Maybe because sometimes growth rises out of challenges and things that we wouldn't wish.
Yes, I was at a dinner a few months ago, and someone asked me what my best memory was from college basketball, and I was like floundering. When I think about basketball, I think about the friendships that I had, but I had a really hard time pulling out something that was memorable from the actual sport. But I'll tell you what, if I think long enough, the thing that came to mind was not an exciting thing. It wasn't a championship trophy. It was a halftime conversation in a game where we thought the game was going to be tight, and we pulled out a 12-point margin by halftime, and I went into the locker room. I was a senior at the time and a captain, and so much enthusiasm about our first half. And when halftime ended, a freshman who was probably the best athlete I ever had the opportunity of playing with said, "Hey, Nikki, we still have a half to play." And I thought, oh my goodness, we ended up losing that game. And that was probably the biggest lesson. We have to finish. We have to finish well. We can't celebrate at halftime.
There's still more time on the clock.
Yes.
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 That is a profound. So it wasn't a specific play that happened or a specific moment. It was at halftime.
I came into the locker room so pumped about our performance in the first half, but we still had a half to play, and a freshman had to remind me of that.
And was it the case where sometimes you see sports teams and other, this can apply to life too, where you play not to lose rather than to win? Would you say in that second half you kind of just played too conservatively, you backed it in?
I don't know what happened.
Not sure what happened, but it didn't work out well in the end.
I think we thought we had it in the bag, because that's what I came into halftime and told them. Not good, Kent.
It's amazing. It's amazing how some of those things stick with us.
Yes.
Lessons from sports and other activities
Yes.
that still stick with us.
Yeah.
What other challenges?
Yeah.
What other challenges, Nikki, that have you walked through and navigated where you reflect now back on and say, I wouldn't have chose that. Wouldn't have been how I would have scripted it. But you know what? I'm who I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm still becoming that person. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the basketball story was
Sure.
a small one in comparison to a journey that I've been on in the last 7 or 8 years. I actually lost my hearing, and that situation brought a lot of adversity. It brought a lot of insecurity. It brought some grief. It brought anger, lots of different emotions. But as you said, there's so much richness and so much good that came from it that I'm grateful for.
Well, tell us that story. Like, how did that all happen?
Yeah.
How did it start? Did it happen gradually? Was it fairly sudden? Because losing one of our senses, any one of them, let alone hearing, that's a very jolting type of a thing. Walk us through that. Yeah.
So Andy and I moved. It's probably been 11 years now. We moved to a new house, and in 2015, we had been there maybe a year and a half. We were just noticing that we were getting really frustrated with each other, Kent.
It happens.
Yeah, we have little kids at home. This new house had an open floor plan, and Andy was constantly frustrated with me for not listening to him and like checking out of conversations. And I started kind of snapping back. Well, if you want to have a conversation with me, you probably ought to stop speaking into the refrigerator and mumbling and talk to me.
Yeah, his problem.
Yeah, your
it's your
problem.
problem. Yeah. No, I think we've heard this. We've seen this before. Yeah, we've all experienced this, right?
So he would just say, "Well, I was telling you a story and you were interacting, and then all of a sudden it just dropped off." And so I finally said, "Okay, fine. I will prove to you that this is not my problem. I'm going to go get a hearing test."
It reminds me of that commercial, I forget now, where they throw the challenge flag. Like there's a debate
challenge
as to
flag
the
is
challenge
down.
was thrown. And so we need to go back to the tape and we need to review this.
Yes.
So this is what happens.
Yes.
I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to prove to you I don't have a hearing problem.
You mumble.
I mumble.
And you talk into the refrigerator.
So what happened next, Nikki?
Yeah, so I go through the hearing test, and if you know anything about hearing tests, your first time, they throw you a whole bunch of sounds. And so I'm pushing the button, and I'm hearing the beeps, and I'm getting all kinds of confidence, right?
From elementary school, we'd put the, raise our hand.
Raise your hand.
Yeah,
now you push a button, and I was just pushing and pushing. The other hand, I'm crushing it. There's no way I have a hearing problem. So then we go into the office and I meet with the physician and he says, there's, I'm surprised that you made it this long without having a conversation with your doctor, your right ear has a mild loss that would be noticeable by anyone. And I immediately started crying. And I remember the doctor said, "Ma'am," which that feels old to me.
Right.
"Ma'am, are you okay?" And I said, "No, I am not okay. I'm sobbing. I have to go home and tell my husband he doesn't mumble."
So there was a self-awareness moment and
yes,
an act of humility where you felt the need, like, I need to apologize.
yes.
We're in that moment too. Did you at any point have an intuition or an inkling that this would have been the case? It was confirming something, or this came as a complete shock and surprise to you?
It was a complete shock.
Like a revelation, like, wow.
Yeah. And what I'm learning is the brain has all kinds of plasticity, and you've probably as a child read puzzles where words or numbers or missing letters, and your brain can still read what the intention of the written word is.
Right.
Because even though it's not exactly right, your brain fills in the gaps.
Right.
And it does that for hearing too.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, there was no way in my mind that I had this problem. And then right there it was on the paper.
So what happened next?
Yeah. So then we began this journey of trying to figure out what it is. And I did probably about 3 years of exploration as my hearing continued to decline. And I think part of the frustration and anger for me was this was the first time I had faced adversity where hustle
Yes.
didn't help at all.
You couldn't outrun this
I
one
couldn't
or
outrun
outwork this one. Yeah.
Yeah. I tried a steroid regimen. I tried adjusting my diet. What we ended up determining was that the hearing loss was related to arthritis in the inner ear bones. And so some inflammation type activity. And I thought, well, I'll just change my diet. I'll start a vitamin.
Right.
You know,
Everything that you could do in your control.
I was doing. And yet the annual 6-month tests continued to show decline. And in fact, the other ear began to decline as well. So
That's very scary. Yeah.
Super scary. As a person who loves connection, loves people, I had deep fear over isolation, being left out, not being able to understand what was happening around me, loneliness. And these weren't things I was experiencing necessarily, but they were fears that I had. Yeah. So, of course, I got the best hearing aids that we could find. I think my dad would love to take them out into the woods on his hunting days.
He's a deer, he could hear a deer coming, 5 miles away.
Yes, I had the ability on my phone to adjust my hearing patterns and habits and make restaurants and conference room meetings and all of those hearing situations just fine. I was able to navigate well. But I feared what the future would look like. And the physician that I was working with didn't help me feel confident about surgery as being an option. In addition to the otosclerosis, which is the diagnosis I had a collapsed ear canal in the ear that was the worst.
Okay.
And he wanted to start with the better ear, and I just didn't want to risk losing the hearing in my best ear. So over time, I had hearing aids that were providing really great support, and I also sought out a second opinion and found a physician who had a ton of confidence, was willing to start with the worst ear, and just gave me hope that there might be an opportunity to correct this with a surgery.
Well, even before that, you talk about our bodies are amazing things. When we have limitations in one sense, then the other senses, or you find ways to overcome some of those things. What did you observe there where, again, you were able to become even more aware of or more sensitive to other things in other ways that you wouldn't have if your hearing would have been?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it's so true that when your brain doesn't have to focus on hearing because there's not sound there for it to process, it redirects its focus. And so I did become a pretty good lip reader. I became much more tuned in to people's emotions, which is something I cared about before, but just really realizing what the gift of your presence does, even when you can't hear. Listening and hearing are two different things.
Yes. We could talk a long time about that.
We could.
Let's do that. But even in the midst of grieving this limitation as it was perceived, how did you shift? What reflections do you have in terms of shifting to kind of a me-centered, this is about me and I'm kind of uncomfortable, how am I making people feel, and am I having an impact, versus then that becoming other-centered in ways that were actually surprisingly redemptive or things that you didn't expect?
Yeah. So,
because I'm sure it probably came as like, why is this happening? Yes. How could this happen?
Yes. Well, at the beginning, I didn't want people to know. Okay. I was trying to figure it out for myself. I traveled a lot for work, as I said. Near the end, before the surgeries, I couldn't hear at all. So I had a moderate to severe loss in both ears. And so basically that's a 60 decibel loss and greater. And 60 decibels is basically speaking voice. So I even had some areas where I had an 80 decibel loss. So significant hearing where I couldn't hear anything. It sounded silent to me. So traveling, I would not sleep well because I was afraid I wouldn't hear the alarm, or if there was a fire, I wouldn't know to evacuate the building. Sure. I had a shaker that was under my pillow for an alarm clock because I couldn't hear sound. When you put your ear up against a pillow with a hearing aid in, there's frequency and feedback that makes a noise. You can't sleep with that. So I had this shaker, and I'd be so nervous it would fall on the floor. And so in addition to grief and frustration, I had this anger and just a lot of emotions, but I didn't want other people to be aware of that. I kept that to myself. I thought, well, if my batteries and my hearing aids go dead in this meeting, I'm not changing them. I don't want to draw attention to yourself. I don't want to disrupt the meeting.
Be a distraction.
So I would often change batteries before a long meeting just to make sure, and kind of managing this without letting other people be a part of it.
So did that shift, and when did that shift? And then what did you experience when people actually you became more open to sharing these things?
Yeah. Well, what I've learned, and it goes back to the power of other people in our lives. The highest performers ask for help. They let people in. They're vulnerable. The highest performers have support. Yeah. And I know this.
Yes,
I've
intuitively.
Received this,
right.
But it required a humility. And what I learned is that humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
That's good.
So this isn't something that's bad about me. I didn't do something wrong to lose my hearing. It's nothing that I should be embarrassed about. But I'm spending all this time and emotional energy managing the situation so that other people don't notice, and that I show up as, all together, Nikki,
yes.
I'm here for it. When in actuality, letting other people in and be a part of it was not just a gift to me, but it was a gift to them.
It's a generosity thing. It goes back to that. What did you experience, and maybe in some surprising ways, in terms of what care you received or what empathy you received and how that looked?
Yeah, well, there's a communication theory about reciprocity. And when we disclose things that are hard for us or that are uncomfortable for us, it invites people to share their story too. Yep. And when there's shared understanding, embarrassment can't exist there. When we feel other people's compassion, we can't feel shamed at the same time.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about vulnerability, and that's kind of what you're describing. To the extent that we are able to show our vulnerability in appropriate ways, it just creates environments of trust and connection and things that it's kind of counterintuitive. And we know these things, you knew these things, and yet it sounds like you were kind of even surprised as you experienced them.
I was surprised.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that is amazing. So go back to let's kind of talk about the listening and hearing, because that's a really good one. And because, well, describe the difference. I mean, because we can all relate to that. We might hear, but we're not listening.
Right.
Unpack that a little bit more for us.
So, well, my mom's the best listener I know.
Yes.
And her ability to just be present is it's such a wonderful gift. And I think of listening as entering into a space and just acknowledging what is with another person. And that has so much power. Hearing is being able to process the sounds, but listening is entering into the space of understanding and presence.
It goes well beyond even one sense, like hearing.
It does. It does. So, the word silent and the word listen have the same letters.
Interesting.
They do.
I never thought of that
as
before.
a person who loves to tell stories and loves to interact, my mom gave me a great gift by being a good listener,
Yes.
but what that created was a monster talker.
I can't imagine, Nikki. I can't imagine
I
that.
love to tell stories, and I had a
Yes.
captive audience and still
Yes,
do
yes.
in my mom. And so I love to tell stories, and I have to really discipline myself to listen. Beyond hearing sometimes, it's a discipline.
And being present, our gift of presence can be some of the most powerful, greatest acts of generosity that we can be for others.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard for us? It
Yeah.
sounds so intuitive or natural when you
Yeah.
explain it that way, and yet what keeps us from
Yeah.
being good at being present?
Well, I think in our humanness, we want to be important. We want to feel like our opinions matter.
We have
and
something to
we want to be
contribute.
heard.
Yeah.
So we often spend hearing time thinking about how we'll respond or how we'll add value or how we'll show up or what people are thinking about us. Maybe I'm the only one who has these things going on in my
don't
head,
believe.
but I have to discipline myself to shut it down and be here for the other person.
Yeah. And you would say you're still growing into that, I would
Oh,
imagine.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm still growing into it. I love it. And when I have that kind of connection that I'm describing with another person, it's one of the greatest joys. But I'm still working on that being who I am all the time.
So, Nikki, when I'm listening to your story and hearing, just reflecting on things that most people don't really have an opportunity to experience, let alone think about, and you're drawing out amazing things that we can experience when we have a limitation like loss of hearing, and how our other senses kind of come and compensate for that. But just as we start to wrap up our conversation today, what do you continue to learn about being present and listening and hearing that would just be a good reminder to all of us who may not have to walk through exactly what you walked through, but can deeply connect and relate to some of what you described today?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things I would say as we wrap up. There's always reason to be hopeful. What I didn't get to yet is that I had surgeries on both of my ears that restored my hearing.
Wow.
And while I still wear hearing aids occasionally, especially when I'm tired or not feeling well, for the most part, I can manage my hearing really well. And that is a gift. But I'm also recognizing the importance of presence and time in a new way. We talked about saying yes.
Right.
That journey has continued for me in figuring out how do I want to spend my time. And one of the decisions that I want to say yes to most of the time is being present with people and being a good listener. I learned from my mom that there's nothing that's a better gift. And I can think of times where I wasn't able to hear well and I could still understand that people could feel my presence. So think about a time when you have an opportunity to eat a meal with a family member and you walk into the house and the house just smells like Christmas morning. The ham is cooking. You can just smell it.
Yep.
But you can sort of taste it too.
I'm tasting it right now.
You can
You're right.
sort of taste it.
You're right.
And so this idea of being present with people, even if I miss something they say, I can still feel the emotion that they're feeling, and I can still offer hope with the way that I connect. And so I want to keep making time to say yes to that.
That's powerful, Nikki, and I think the other person can feel it too. When it's truly authentic and genuine as you're describing it, I think both people kind of know it's happening, even if they can't fully explain it scientifically.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Nikki, thanks for being here today. Thanks for the gift of your presence. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Kent.